Majority have joined, right? Okay, so yesterday we discussed about job analysis and the recruitment process. And I hope it was clear for everyone. And today we are going to move on to employee selection. So the learning outcomes basically will be covering about the selection process and the aims of the selection process, a little bit about selection policies, procedures, and selection methods such as shortlisting, interviews, psychological testing. Alternative selection methods will also be discussed, and employee referrals. And we'll be discussing a little bit about certain perception errors that as human beings that we could do in the selection process. And finally, the good practices to eliminate such errors. So at the end of the session, you'll be able to identify effective employee selection methods, the perception errors in the selection process, and how we could eliminate these interviewer errors. So this is the outline of today's session. So to start with, if we kind of talk a little bit about the selection, we start this with recruitment, and the next task is to select the most suitable person. Okay, so a successful recruitment campaign should be there to grab a pool of candidates so that you can start the selection to pick the most suitable person. So if we talk about the aims and objectives of the selection process, the main aim is you have to make sure that you choose the best person for the job. So that's the main goal of the selection process. And you have to make sure that the selectors try to match whoever the candidates to the job requirements, and we are doing a kind of a prediction as to how they will perform after we offer the position. So the job requirements we kind of yesterday we discussed. From job analysis, we derived the two documents, job description and job specification, which leads to the creation of the advertisement. And then we kind of perform certain selection, there are different selection methods. So, for instance, if you take an interview, you interview the candidate, and then by talking to the candidate on certain aspects which you have in the job description and the person specification, you're doing a prediction. Assume that the candidate is having all the required qualifications, experiences, and the you feel that based on the selection methods that you have used, that the candidate is able to perform whatever the tasks that you have tested during the selection process. And by doing so, you're making a prediction that they will do the same even after they have been selected for the position. So the people who are doing these selections, they also need to ensure that the candidate fully understands all the major aspects of that job. That is why it's important from the time of recruitment to make sure that you clearly mention what are your job requirements. That is, what qualifications that they require, what experiences that they require. So that is the job specification. And then a person who is having such qualifications and experiences, we are mentioning, okay, these are the tasks, the job role that you are supposed to perform. So even during the interview or the selection process, you have to make sure that you test the candidates as to what extent they do perform these skills and competencies and the abilities to perform the job role. And then you select well-matched applicants. For instance, you have advertised saying that a basic degree is a requirement for this particular job role. So you match the people who are having that particular degree qualification. And then you have certain realistic expectations as to how a person who is having that degree qualification will perform this job role. So if you look at the main objectives of the selection process, it would be you need to gather as much as relevant information as possible. So assume that you're doing an interview or maybe a test that you're giving, because I told you there are so many selection methods that we can use. So irrespective of what method that you're going to use, you try to gather as much as information from the candidate. So this is a mistake that some of the employers are doing. They talk a lot during interviews than the candidate. So a smart candidate can even get to know certain information when the interviewer speaks a lot. So you need to make sure that you gather the information in a way that you kind of get that person to speak up. So whatever the information that you gather, you have to organize and evaluate the information. In the sense, you need to have a fact sheet where you may have a kind of a soft copy or even a hard copy where you may have the candidates' names and whatever the criteria that you're going to check. So you see whether these criteria are being met or not. So you need to kind of either tick or make a note on it. And then at the end, after you get these sheets into your hand, you have to do an evaluation and see, okay, candidate 1 possess all these essential criteria, but not the desirable criteria. Candidate 2, for instance, you may see, okay, all the essential criteria are being met, but more than one desirable criteria is being met. So then you see evaluation means you look at the pros and the cons, or maybe the advantages, disadvantages, the positives, negatives. You see, you weigh it and see which is more feasible. So the same way you weigh the information that you have collected about the candidates, and then you see who is the most suitable person out of the candidates. And then you do an assessment of each candidate in order to forecast their performance on the job and provide information to the applicant so that they can decide if they wish to accept the offer or not. Because even though we decide, okay, this person is good for our job role, and we decide to kind of offer them the job role, we don't know whether the candidate is okay to accept the offer. Okay, so after we decide the most suitable candidate for the position, we have to make sure that we inform the candidate about our decision, and then we have to ask for their opinion about whether they are going to accept the offer or not. Any questions or any clarifications up to here? . 。 . 。 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 。 . 。 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。
. . 。 . 。 .
Okay, all clear. Please feel free to stop me if you have any doubts or any areas which are not clear. Okay. So the next would be in the selection procedure, we have to make sure the selection procedure should establish whatever the stages and techniques that we are going to use in the selection process. So that means what type of selection methods we are going to use. Sometimes it could be just one method or more than one method. And who is going to involve in assessing the candidates. So sometimes we do see, even during interviews, we see one person, people will be there. Sometimes we can see there's a panel. Okay, so who is going to be there in this panel? Okay, so normally when it comes to interviews, if there's a panel, mostly the line manager, your immediate supervisor, that is the person whom you're going to report to, would be there. So that person is the best person who has an idea about what you're supposed to do. And sometimes if it is a kind of a final interview, there will be a person from the top management, most probably an HR person. That is basically the technical aspects will be technical, and the job related tasks will be evaluated by your immediate supervisor, because he or she is the most suitable person to kind of test your knowledge, capabilities, and the competencies on the job role. Apart from that, to discuss about the HR proceedings, your salaries, your working hours, and all these things should be discussed with your HR person. So that is why we have to decide who is going to be involved in assessing the candidate. Who are the people who are going to be there in the interviews, or maybe if it is a test, who is going to do the evaluation. And the administrative process. What is the administrative process? Now, for instance, in certain organizations, they do have an initial interview, second interview, and then a final interview. Or sometimes they may have an initial test, and then the people who get selected from the test may face another interview, and then maybe a final interview. So likewise, what would be the process of this selection process? So in terms of the selection methods, if we look at, before talking about the selection methods, I would like to talk a little bit about this policies. So I hope the procedure is clear for you. If we take the recruitment policies, you have certain policies in the organization. Sometimes maybe certain restrictions could be there. Sometimes you may have policies, procedures which are aligned with the legal framework in that country. For instance, I have been working in a country where, like, I worked for a university. They had a kind of a ratio. So if you're getting people from outside, uh, for like 100 employees, only one foreigner can be recruited. So likewise, there are certain restrictions. So even this one, like one person whom you're going to get from outside, you have to have a valid justification to say that you are unable to find someone within the country. Okay, so these are type of certain conditions that they do have according to the rules and regulations of the country. And if we look at the selection methods, the different selection methods, Interviews can be there. Psychological tests can be there. There's something called an assessment center. And also we can select individuals using the references that they use in the CV. So before we kind of use a particular selection method, we need to make sure that we shortlist the candidates. So this is the first step. Okay, first step is to reduce the applicants to a manageable number. Because the moment you get the CVs into your hand, we don't know how many people will apply for the position. Because in recruitment, what we basically do is we attract individuals. So it's good to have more people getting attracted to your advertisement so that you will have more number of CVs. But it's simply impossible to perform these selection methods for all the people who have sent the CVs. So that's the main reason we start the selection process with shortlisting. That is to make sure that you reduce the applications to a manageable number. Okay. So in shortlisting, this is a kind of the shortlisting of applicants. It's a kind of a procedure that you can perform purely on the basis of the written information that the applicants have supplied. So when it comes to the recruitment part, normally the applicants will send their CVs and there's another thing that will be sent along with the CV, which is the cover letter. Okay, so based on these two documents, we can shortlist the candidates. So I hope you will learn about making CVs, that is to brand themselves. Okay, so the people who are sending their CVs, they are branding themselves through the CV. So this is the first thing that the employer is getting into their hands, and it's going to be the first impression that they're going to have towards this candidate. So you have to make sure that you prepare your CV and the cover letter in a professional manner. So when assessing these written job applications, it's important to be objective and make notes that refer only to the relevant criteria. So when we get a CV, we can see what are the criteria that we are looking at. Okay, and whether this CV has the criteria. So if you could recall what we discussed yesterday, essential criteria would be the degree. Okay, so you have the degree, 3 years of experience. Okay, so you check in the CV, you check whether these criteria are matching. Okay, so you're not going to see how nice the color of the CV or anything. The look and feel, that appearance is also important, but what matters is you check whether these criteria that you have in the advertisement is there in your CV, the CVs that you have received. Okay, so it could be the essential and the desirable criteria that you have listed. So to reduce the biases associated with gender or racial origin, okay, candidates can be referred to by their initials, not the name. Okay, so in the selection notes. So you can just have the initials rather than just having a name. And also avoiding criteria that could lead to unlawful discrimination. Selectors should also avoid using other criteria that are not strictly related to the candidate's ability to do the job. For instance, whether the person is kind of married or the religion. So sometimes in CVs, we do see these information, whether the person is married or not, what religion they are, whether the person is a male or a female. As far as it's not a criteria for your job role, you shouldn't be looking for such options. So, as discussed yesterday, the person specification plays a major role in the selection process because that is the document which lists all the characteristics that the person should have in order to perform the job role. That means the degree, the qualifications, the competencies, how many years of experiences they do have. All these things comes under person specification. Apart from that, nowadays people are looking at something very, very important, which is the soft skill part. Okay, I don't know whether you all have heard about such things. Because nowadays people look for this mostly because we need to kind of get people with the right attitudes. Some employers, they believe that certain tasks we can teach and get the candidates trained on such things, but the soft skills, it's very difficult to kind of develop unless they have it the time that they're joining the organization. So you have to make sure that you are assessing whatever these skills, knowledge, all these requirements that are necessary for your job role. So basically, you need to check whether the CV is tallying with the person specification. So next we are going to move on to interviews. Now, when we talk about interviews, there are different types of interviews like telephone interviewing. So these days we mostly see this telephone interviews are happening to do the initial screening also. Sometimes the initial interviews will be held through the telephone, and mostly I would say nowadays we do have the interviews online. So this is becoming more popular because it's more cost effective, a cost effective way to communicate with the candidates. Because if we are to have physical interviews, it's a kind of a hassle for both the candidate and the employer, the people who are kind of doing the interviews. So it's more cost effective if you do the interviews via telephone or online. And at the same time, we do have telephone, other than telephone and online interviews, we do have face-to-face interviews. So this is the most popular and the frequently used method that most of the people are aware. But poorly conducted interviews can lead to decisions with low predictive validity. That means they do not test what they're supposed to test. Okay, what abilities that they do have to perform the job. That is what needs to be tested. And also, there can be poor interviewer reliability. That means if two interviewers may arrive at different opinions about the same candidate. So that means there's a problem with the reliability. One says the candidate is good, one says, okay, I'm not that happy with this candidate. Okay, so there's a problem with the reliability because the two interviewers may not have the same opinion about the candidate. So there can be such errors because humans are doing these interviews. So these human perceptual errors can be there when it comes to interviews. So that's why it's important to discuss about interviewer errors. Before we discuss about interviewer errors, if you have any questions or any clarifications on what we discussed so far, can you just let me know? All good up to now, or do you have any questions or clarifications? Okay, thank you very much. So then we are going to move on to this interviewer errors. So first of all, now most of the time we do see these interviewer errors because of perceptual selection. That is, we select those to which we will pay attention to. That means we focus on certain aspects of our environment and then we ignore certain other things. At the same time, we select certain things based on our experiences, our personality, motivation. Okay, so we try to relate others' experiences with our own experiences, personality, motivation. Okay, so we might also focus on, inappropriate or wrong stimuli in some circumstances, ignoring information that is appropriate. For instance, you might see certain qualities of the candidate similar to yourself or maybe your closer friend, your mother, father, so that you tend to kind of maybe like the person or dislike the person. So you're trying to kind of ignore the information that is required to assess, but you're looking at certain other things related to your experiences, personality, motivation, etc. So because of these, certain types of errors can occur. One such error would be the halo effect. So halo effect is if the interviewer form a good impression about a candidate. That means it's going to be a positive influence. Their interpretation of everything else is going to happen the same way. So you have an initial good impression about the candidate and you kind of perceive that everything this candidate does is also going to be something good. Okay. So the interviewers need more positive information to confirm their initial judgment. Okay, so we see something good about the person and we make a kind of a positive influence, and we kind of do a kind of an interpretation of everything. Okay, because we like that person, we had a good impression about the person, we think, okay, all would be kind of very impressive. At the same time, We may also have a negative thought about the candidate also. Okay, so we call that a horns effect. Halo effect is a positive impression that you have. The opposite is the horns effect, where the interviewers develop an initial negative impression about the candidate and seek negative information to confirm their first impression. So I didn't like the candidate because of certain things and I have a negative feeling, and I'm trying to kind of confirm my first impression, the first negative impression that I had towards the candidate. So which is called the horns effect. Can you understand the two things? Is that clear? Yes or no? Is it clear for everyone? Because some students, they kind of get confused about these two things. Okay, so the next error would be making snap decisions. So it is often stated that interviewers make up their minds about a candidate during the first 5 minutes, and they are not going to change their views of that person's suitability. Okay, so that means the interviewers are responding to a very limited range of stimuli and are not taking the opportunity to kind of get this wide range of information. So you judge the person within the first 5 minutes and then you're not going to change your view. So that is what we call making snap decisions. Third one is hiring people like oneself, meaning there's a human tendency to identify with people who are similar to us and share several of our characteristics. So sometimes we see, okay, I also like gardening. This person is also like gardening. So you have kind of common characteristics. This person is a left-hander. I'm also a left-hander. He prefers, I would say, photography. Okay, I also like photography. So you see, kind of, there's a tendency that you see similar things, common things between yourself and the candidate. Okay, so you forget about all the criterias which were there in the specification, job description, and all these things. Because you see common things between yourself and the candidate, you tend to hire that person, which is what we called hiring people like oneself. So, but any of these characteristics won't necessarily equate with the job performance. Me and that candidate having the same hobby won't help that person to perform the job. But because of the interviewer has the same characteristics, you tend to like the person. Okay. The next interviewer error would be stereotyping. So this occurs when a person is being identified as belonging to a group with certain characteristics. Okay, and then we are assuming that this person is also having the same characteristics as the members in that particular group. So now sometimes we say, no, okay, people from this area, they are like this. Okay, so we try to generalize things. So sometimes maybe even though this person is also coming from the same area, maybe that person may not have the same similar characteristics. But we try to stereotype. We think, okay, since majority who are in this particular area having this characteristic, I assume that this person is also having the same. Okay. The people who are coming from this school, they are like this. The people from this country, they have this attitude. So likewise, we do have stereotyping. Okay. Now, for instance, sometimes it should be remembered that people sharing the same group identity, for example, in certain countries, black people, white people, likewise, they do kind of can be different to each other. Okay. So likewise, we try to kind of put that person also to a particular group or members of that particular group, and then we kind of assume that this person will also have the same characteristics as those group members. The next interview error would be making assumptions. Okay, so there are many instances where inexpert interviewers, instead of finding how the interviewee would act, impose their own personal view of how they would act in a particular circumstance. You are making judgments. Okay, so one example would be assuming women will bear the majority of the major responsibilities for childcare. Okay, so that's the main reason that we do see, like in most of the companies, when it comes to promoting people for higher positions, people believe, they make assumptions thinking that, okay, females might not be able to work late hours. They might have other responsibilities, so they may not be able to take up these responsibilities. So these are making assumptions. We don't know. Okay, so even though they kind of take care of kids, do the housework, we can't assume that they will not be able to kind of take up all the other responsibilities. So these are making assumptions about people. And at the same time, if we don't gather sufficient or relevant information, we might not be able to pick the right candidates. So in order to make informed decisions about a particular candidate, we have to make sure that we have collected sufficient and relevant information. Sufficient and relevant information means according to the job specification and job description, we have to see whether the candidate has those criterias, whether the criterias are being met or not. So the interviewers should be aware about all these mistakes and make sure that they obtain all these necessary information before they take a decision about the selection of a candidate. And there's this another interview error, which is called the contrast effect. Okay, that is, it's a kind of an effect where an assessment of a candidate is affected by who is interviewed before and after. Now, sometimes this happens mostly. Now, assume that you have certain criteria which you are looking for. But the person whom you interviewed before, that person has performed really well, exceptionally. Okay. And the next candidate, maybe that person also has met the criteria, but you're comparing this person with the previous person who did really well at the interview. So then you feel that compared to the previous person, this person's performance is not that good, which is wrong. Okay, so that person performed really well. it doesn't mean that the second person has not performed. The second person also has met the criteria. But the problem is you're comparing the previous person and this person based on the performance levels. It can also happen the other way around. If the person who has performed previously have not performed really well, and the next candidate who comes is not even meeting the criteria, but you're comparing that person with the previous person, and you feel compared to the previous person, my God, this person is much better. That is because you compare the second person with the first person, but it doesn't mean that the second person has um, kind of meeting the criteria that you're looking for. Okay, so which is called the contrast effect. Before we move on to the next topic, good practices to eliminate the interview errors, I would like to know whether you have any questions or clarifications on the interview errors that we discussed. Are you all okay with the interview errors? Starting with halo effect, horns effect, making snap decisions, hiring people like oneself, stereotyping, making assumptions, gathering insufficient or irrelevant information, and the contrast effect. So these are the interviewer errors that we discussed. Any questions or anything which is not clear about these errors that we discussed? Yes or no? All good? Okay. I see less responses there this time. Okay, all good. Okay, then we'll move on to good practice designed to eliminate interviewer errors. So the errors that we discussed previously can be eliminated by gathering adequate number of information, and you can conduct structured or at least semi-structured interviews. Okay, so that you kind of have the same questions raised for all the candidates. Because if you kind of ask questions vaguely without a structure, you may ask different questions from different people, which is hard to evaluate afterwards. And to reduce the error that you kind of have towards your perceptions, you can have more than one interviewer in the panel. Give consideration to time and location. You have to make sure that you give kind of consider about the time and the location of the interview as well. Okay, whether the location, now for instance, if the place is in your interview, the place that you're interviewing, if the AC is very cold, sometimes the candidate might not focus on what you're asking. The person might want to leave the place soon. Okay. So likewise, you have to give some attention to such aspects as well. And as an interviewer, you need to improve your skills to interview candidates as well. So before the interview, it's not only the candidate, even the interviewers should prepare for the interviews. You have to put candidates at ease. Don't make them stressful. Okay? Ensure that body language, tone of the voice should be neutral. And make sure that you ask only relevant questions. Because sometimes certain interviewers, we see they ask just questions about family members, like all the irrelevant questions, but not the most important questions that they're supposed to ask. And rather than you talking, get the candidate to talk. And whenever possible, with the consent of the candidate, either you record the information or you take down the notes about what is being discussed during the interview. And also you can invite and respond to candidates' questions as well. Normally this happens at the end. We ask from the candidate also whether they also have certain things to clarify, or they need to know anything about the company or anything related to the position, if they have any questions for clarifications. And then the closure of the interview happens, and then you do the evaluation based on the information that you have collected, and your decision should be justifiable. When you do a selection, you have to make sure that the choice is justifiable. Okay. And apart from the now I've mostly talked about interviews, but apart from interviews, we do have this psychological testing, which is a method where we can acquire information about individuals' abilities and traits. Okay, so which is also being used to test individuals' capabilities. And there's this, when it comes to psychological testing, the standardized administration of the tests. Okay, so all the applications answer the test questions under the same condition. Okay, then only you will be able to get a clear picture as to how well the candidates have performed for these psychological tests. And when it comes to the intelligence that we are going to test in the individuals, we can see their common sense, which is very, very important nowadays. Because theoretically people talk, but they don't kind of have the common sense, which is the practical intelligence. Okay. Emotional intelligence. So these are certain types of intelligence that we can test. And there's something called an assessment center, where like this includes many different types of exercises to assess the attributes of the individuals. Okay, so there will be multiple assessors, and they will be administered to groups of individuals rather than in single individuals. So in an assessment center, you may have like more than one test, maybe starting with a psychometrics test, and then the ones who get through this psychometric test can go and sit for another examination, and then followed by an interview. So likewise, many selection methods will be there. So the rationale of the assessment center is to provide opportunities for the candidates to display effective performance in some tightly constructed simulated environment. Okay. So it appears that it's not the performance that strikes the assessors, but underlying abilities and personality characteristics illuminated by those simulated environments. So you create that type of an environment in an assessment center, and then you kind of evaluate the individual. And we see certain characteristics such as some of the assessments are being done in groups. That means, like, for instance, if you want to see how well the candidate can work in a group environment, you can give them some group activities. Okay. Effective people, and to kind of perform that activity, center evaluators are most unfamiliar with these candidates. They are not known people for these candidates. And there can be group exercises, interviews, and sometimes role. For certain job roles, you do have these clinical tests also to see how fit you are for the job role. Okay, so normally in forces, one has said that I can't hear. I hope it's been said that it's clear now. So this clinical testing is also can be done at an assessment center. And another type of a test would be work sample tests. So to kind of measure the job skills, we take samples of behavior under realistic job-like conditions. For instance, in a like the performance may not be assessed at an actual workstation, but you're being assigned a task, and the equipments are also being given to you, and then you're being asked to kind of, maybe if you're to kind of join a call center, they may kind of give you the opportunity to kind of serve a customer, and they may evaluate as to how you're going to serve the customer. Okay, so likewise, work sample tests also can happen. And there's something called situational judgment tests. So normally we do see these situational judgment tests are like recently these work sample tests are being expanded to cover these white collar jobs. Okay, so there we mostly use these situational judgment tests. So commonly a paper and a pencil test that presents the candidate with a written scenario. Okay, so and ask the candidate to choose the best responses from a series of alternatives. Okay, so you can kind of give situational judgment tests. You give an example, a scenario, get that person to read, understand the scenario, and then kind of give their judgment in a particular situation. I remember when I was studying for my master's, one of our lecturer was telling for this decision making. Now there's this train coming and there are two roads. In a particular road, there's this one person who is I can't remember exactly whether the person is a relative of yours or a friend. And in the other road, there are many people, but you don't know any of them. But the scenario is you have no choice. You can't use your brakes. Even though you take route 1 or route 2, you're going to kill the people. So if you take the first route, you're just going to kill one person, but that person is known to you. If you take the other route, there are many people. Okay. So which route are you going to take? So it's a kind of a situational judgment. What is the best possible option you're going to take at that particular instance? Okay, so these are certain types of tests that you can give to an individual to see how they make judgments on a particular situation. And the final one is, as I told you earlier, employee referrals or referees. I'm sure you would have heard about referees. We include 2 or 3 referees at the end of our CV. So normally they say non-related referees. Okay. So you have to make sure that you include the name of the person, the designation, contact numbers, email addresses, and make sure that these are working contacts. Okay, so unless otherwise, don't give some such information if that person is not contactable. And make sure that the person is relevant to your job role. For instance, me being a lecturer, putting a doctor as a referee won't make much of a kind of a advantage for me. Okay, so likewise, someone who can recommend you in that particular position. Okay. So these are the different types of selection methods. And so as a summary, we discussed the aims of the selection process, bit about the policies and procedures, the selection methods, shortlisting, interviews, psychological testing, alternative selection methods, employee referrals. And also we discussed about the potential perception errors in the selection process, and finally, good practices to eliminate interviewer errors. So these are the things that we discussed under selection. Any questions or any clarifications before we wind up? Yeah. Any questions or any clarifications? All good? Okay then, thank you very much and wish you all the very best. Okay then.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.